Deputy President Paul Mashatile is expected to wrap up the two-day national dialogue on coalition governments in Cape Town today. Yesterday, political parties expressed concern about coalition instabilities at local government level. The National Freedom Party warned that unless politics are separated from administration, coalition governments will not work. The African Christian Democratic Party suggested the legislation to maintain law and order be implemented. All parties will gather for the last leg of that meeting today. Athi Mtongana is standing by to tell us what to expect. So Athi Mtongana, yesterday the ATM walked out of that meeting, and this morning the UDM speaking to them saying, well, they're not going to be part of it anymore.
That's correct, Dudu. You would have heard smaller political parties complaining about what they say is a grand coalition plan by the bigger political parties, namely the African National Congress and the Democratic Alliance. In fact, later on, we will be in conversation with the leader of the DA, Johnston Hazen, who wants to set the record straight insofar as those claims by political parties like the ATM yesterday, which, as you mentioned, staged a walkout soon after addressing the delegates here at the National Dialogue on Government Coalitions, and they were saying basically that they, as smaller political parties, are being used as scapegoats insofar as the instability at local government in relation to coalitions. I'm joined by Professor Gidibone Pake. Thank you so much for your time. Well, you have been here since yesterday, and we've seen that political parties like the ATM and the UDM are least interested in what is taking place here. Let's perhaps begin there.
Thank you, Athi, and good morning to the viewers. Yes, I think it's a watershed moment for South Africa to actually have this conversation, because we are entering into an era where we think and believe that we are going to experience coalitions in local government, in provincial government, and possibly even at the national government from 2024. And I think it's very strategic for the Office of the Deputy President to actually have this kind of a platform in order to prepare South Africans to govern themselves better. But yeah, going to your question in terms of the smaller parties, is that they are largely, if I understood them very well, disgruntled, especially on the question of threshold. In other words, how many percentages of the votes do they need to allow them into parliament or the provincial legislatures or even into the municipal council? But I think it's something that we are grappling with. My understanding is slightly different from what they are having, in the sense that because South Africa has a proportional representation system, it actually means that anybody can contest elections across the board, and their percentages and margin will determine whether they have a seat in parliament or in the provincial legislature or in the local council. What I understand in the way the question of threshold is being presented here is that it is in the manner that should constitute the government, and hence the question of grand coalitions that Bandiholo Misal's speech actually was even advising ANC that it would be better that ANC can work directly with DA, and I think that maybe would be a subject of interest and conversation.
They may differ insofar as the electoral threshold and which political party takes up the lead in those coalition alliance versus the votes that they garner after elections. But they certainly then, those that do agree that coalitions do need to be regulated.
I am a firm believer in putting down regulations, but I think we need to be extremely cautious, because this is just the beginning, because of what we have seen happening in Ekurhuleni, in Joburg, and even in Tshwane and in PE. So I think we must find ways to regulate. In fact, I think it's the overall sentiments of this platform that I think if you listened to the conversations and presentations yesterday from the Kenyan High Commissioner, she actually made a presentation around how they govern coalitions. And it looks like this platform is buying into that idea of having a office of the registrar or moderator or something along those lines. And I think it's an interesting concept that will help us see how we can have coalitions agreements made.
Quickly, before I let you go, it's interesting that you mentioned Kenya, because certainly the opposition parties like the ATM did question the model and the approach that has been taken, particularly in Parliament during that tour to the United Kingdom, slamming them for trying to adopt ways and systems that are done in Europe, saying that Africa, and particularly South Africa, is a whole different ballgame.
Yes, so I think Kenya offers an excellent example on how we could do coalitions, but also South Africa itself, because one reference was made to the 1994 Government of National Unity. So there are models even within South Africa that we can go back to and see how we can make them relevant for today.
All right, Prof, thank you so much for your time. Well, the conversations continue here, Dudu, as various stakeholders, including academia, the business sector, and of course political parties, continue to engage on this very important dialogue on how they'll be creating a framework that will regulate coalition governments leading up to, of course, the provincial and national general elections next year.
Thank you very much, Athi Mtongana, for that update.